All right, good morning. Not doing nothing here with pen and pencil, just having a bit of a nap. Title of my talk today, Think Before You Act. Or choose your thoughts carefully. I don't know. So something that really pisses me off very often is that many people always like to insist that those who commit atrocious acts do so because they're mentally deranged or there's something wrong with them. And to me, that just smacks of dishonesty. Like, you can't ever imagine a situation where you yourself might commit some terrible action. You know, if you'd been in some awful situation that drove you to it, or if you believed certain things that you don't currently believe, right? If you were inhabited by certain ideas, maybe you would act in that way. I think it takes away when we say, oh, these people, these terrorists, they're just all insane, they all have mental deficiencies. I think that's crazy. I think that's the crazy thing to say. It really takes the power away from the ideas that are generating those types of actions. And I think we do that a lot in our own lives. We don't give enough power to the ideas that inform our day-to-day actions. Like, look at the Nazis. Was all of Nazi Germany insane? Sure, many of them were acting out of compulsion, but I'm sure there was a large majority of the Nazis that were acting out of belief in the National Socialist idea, the idea of racial supremacy. They really believed in those things, therefore they could act the way they did without feeling bad, actually feeling good about themselves, thinking they were doing something important. There's journals of Soviet torturists who basically were thanking not God, maybe Stalin or Marx or Lenin, for having brought them to a belief in atheism. I know atheists will hate the word belief, but anyway, brought them to atheism because they could then exercise, they could behave in a certain way that they couldn't have with their prior set of beliefs. They could let out their darker instincts for a little play in the park. They found what they were doing to be fascinating and thrilling in a certain way, because they didn't believe there was a right and wrong, and there was certainly no cosmic justice, so why not? I've also heard, I don't know if this is true, but I've heard that lots of suicide bombers, lots of Islamic fundamentalists are actually the ones who commit the terrorist acts. Many of them are actually really well educated and have a higher than average IQ. Lots of them are holders of degrees and things like that. So they're not crazy people. They're people who have entertained, have flirted with different ideas. So ideas are these sort of parasitic things that I think take people over. You know, an idea has to have that within itself for it to even be propagated, right? Otherwise, an idea would just come about in someone's head and promptly disappear if there was nothing that lent its host anything of value or made it something that people wanted to spread. So it's almost like this Darwinian survival of the fittest. Ideas are sort of competing. And I think partly because we have an interest in truth, so ideas like to have a veneer of truth so that they are propagated more. But I think that much less spoken is the fact that ideas are actually inculcated into tribes. I think that at the locus of many tribes is a set of ideas or beliefs or presuppositions about the world. And as a member of that tribe, it serves your interest as a social creature who wants to climb and have higher social standing to indoctrinate himself. You know, let's say you're part of some Williamsburg hipster group that's really into indie music. Well, in your spare time, you might think about, you might think about music, you might think of some clever quips and anecdotes to throw out at your next hipster gathering. You might research underground bands that no one's ever heard of so that you seem like the coolest, edgiest person at your little gathering thing. If you're into politics, if you have a particular leaning, you might look for information from news outlets that tend to tell you the things you like to hear that seem to confirm your bias, and you want to have the most and the best and the most up-to-date news for when you're around your group of peers, so you can spit out the most interesting things and therefore rise in the esteem of your peers. I think there's a lot of that going on that people don't like to admit to. They don't like to think that lots of their brain power is preoccupied with believing and thinking things that will help them rise within their own little tribe. So if that's the case, if ideas take you over and to a greater or lesser degree affect your behavior and your actions, do you have any control? And I'd say yes. I think that being aware of the fact that your actions might be to a great degree informed by your biology, your sort of biological proclivities, as well as your social setting. I think keeping that in mind, you can choose to aim at certain things that are bound to yield a little bit more fruit than the ideas that you currently flirt with on a daily basis. I think that a smart thing to do is to look at your ideal. I think everyone has this ideal, this person that they desire to become, or this lifestyle that they want to hold. And think, what would that person think, and what are the thoughts that would get that person there? And then on a day-to-day basis, entertain those thoughts. And interact with certain information that'll lead one to think about those thoughts. I think thoughts, in many ways, are like a virgin wood. Maybe that's what your mind is. And you can walk across this wood. And once you've walked across a certain location, you're more, as you know that spot, you're more likely to tread there again. And as you tread there, there'll be a little rut that'll develop. And with time, you know, plants will stop growing there and it'll just become this smooth patch of dirt and becomes a path. And so whenever you come to this wood, you're very likely to walk through this path without even having to think about it. Unconsciously, you just naturally gravitate towards that path because it's the path of least resistance. And so I think it's the same thing with your ideas. I think you spend a tremendous amount of time entertaining ideas in your head that don't necessarily serve towards bringing you any closer to that ideal person that you hope to one day become. You probably will never become that person, but you can at least have a little bit of a rapprochement with that person by thinking the right things and taking the correct actions. I think in lots of the getting better literature, the self-help sort of stuff, there's quite an insistence on, well, either one, loving yourself the way you are, so there's that, or there's this insistence on behavior and just act. You know, these books that list out the actions you need to take to get somewhere. I think that's entirely valid, and I think those books and those ideas are great. But I found from my own experience, say with fitness, I don't have that fitness rut. I don't think much about it. It's not something that occupies my mind. I don't naturally want to gravitate towards thinking about that. I don't have a social group with which I talk about fitness. So on my spare time, I don't spend much time. When I go on autopilot, I don't start daydreaming about fitness and fitness ideas. Nor do I go out of my way really to read books about fitness or YouTube fitness people. But I find if I try to indoctrinate myself with that, I try to create that rut purposefully in my mind, actions fall into place naturally. It becomes far easier for me to want to eat correctly if fitness is always somewhere in my mind. If when I go on into autopilot, I'm likely to start thinking a little bit about fitness. I'm thinking about weightlifting. I'm thinking about how great I feel because I'm getting fitter, or how great I will feel when I'm fit. You know, I have these sort of daydreams, and I think those will inform my behavior in turn. I found that struggling with depression a fair bit, minding my ideas, minding the things that I think about on a daily basis, became a necessary thing, and is a necessary thing. Sometimes you're so far gone that you just can't get out of a thought loop, and even if you can, you're still screwed. You still feel terrible. But I think as a remedy, it's not really a remedy, as a preventative measure, if your head is in the right headspace naturally, when you go into autopilot, you're less likely to fall into these negative, depressive slumps. So yeah, my advice would be, think about how much time you spend during your day entertaining thoughts that don't lead you to where you want to go. How much of your mental thought has to do with your tribe, you know, and is rising up in your tribe that valuable? And maybe it is. Maybe you'll become aware of that and you'll go, well, crap, yeah, maybe the thing to do now is to research even more into these things that my particular group is into, so that I rise in everyone's esteem, because that's my goal. That's my ideal person is sort of at the top of that pyramid. Or maybe not. I think most likely your ideal will lie somewhere else, and you've just sort of fallen in with this group of peers. We often say that you're a contrivance of the 5 people you spend the most time with, and I think that's fairly accurate. And I think that that's because those people lead you to think and believe certain things, lead you to think in a certain way, lead you to create certain ruts in your brain. And it's very hard to get out of them once you have them. But once you are aware that you operate like that, you operate walking through these paths that you've created in your brain over the course of time, you can start to shift them and create new paths that will lead you to act in a way that will lead towards becoming that person you want to. I know it sounds very obvious, but I don't think it's mentioned nearly enough by people. So that's my thing. That's my spiel. Mind your thoughts, or be careful what you think about. Something like that. Okay, cheers, thanks.